The 1960s wasn't just a decade of music, it was a cultural earthquake. Civil rights marches filled the streets, the space race pushed humanity toward the moon. Youth culture exploded with rebellion, color, and new ideas. And behind it all was a soundtrack. Here are the top 5 greatest groups of the 60s, the bands that didn't just make hits, but defined a generation. 5. The Supreme Spef or pop girl groups became global sensations. There were the Supremes, formed in Detroit and guided by the powerhouse label Motown. They became the most successful female group of the 1960s, with Diana Ross, Mary Wilson, and Florence Baller. Their elegance, synchronized choreography, and polished sound crossed racial boundaries at a time when America was deeply divided. They scored 12 #1 hits, including Where Did Our Love Go and Baby Love, bringing Motown's signature blend of soul and pop into living rooms across the country. But their impact went beyond music. They became symbols of sophistication and possibility during the civil rights era, proof that black artists could dominate mainstream charts worldwide. 4. The Doors. If the Supremes were polished and posed, the Doors were mysterious and unpredictable. Fronted by Jim Morrison, they emerged from Los Angeles with a darker, poetic sound that stood apart from the bright optimism of early 60s rock. Songs like Light My Fire, Break On Through, and Riders on the Storm blended blues, jazz, and psychedelia. Morrison's lyrics explored freedom, chaos, and existential questions, themes that resonated deeply in a decade filled with protest and social upheaval. They pushed boundaries on stage and off controversial performances, and Morrison's rebellious persona made them icons of the counterculture. The Doors didn't just soundtrack the 60s, they captured its shadow side. 3. The Beach Boys. From the sunny beaches of California came a sound that defined youthful America. The Beach Boys began with surf rock anthems like Surfin' USA and California Girls, celebrating cars, waves, and teenage freedom, but under the creative leadership of Brian Wilson. The band evolved far beyond simple beach tunes. In 1966, they released Pet Sounds, an album layered with complex harmonies, orchestral arrangements, and deeply personal lyrics. It redefined what a pop album could be, influencing artists across the world and raising the artistic bar for studio production. They proved that American bands could innovate just as boldly as their British rivals. 2. The Rolling Stones. If the Beach Boys were harmony and sunshine, the Rolling Stones were grit and attitude, led by Mick Jagger and Keith Richards. The Stones leaned heavily into blues roots and raw energy. Their 1965 hit I Can't Get No Satisfaction became an anthem of teenage frustration. They cultivated a rebellious image. The Bad Woes of the British Invasion, contrasting sharply with the cleaner-cut image of their rivals. Albums like Beggar's Banquet and Let It Bleed showcased a band growing darker, heavier, and more politically aware. As the decade closed, they didn't just play rock and roll, they embodied it. And at #1, the Beatles. From Liverpool, John Lennon, Paul McCartney, George Harrison, and Ringo Starr began as a tight rock and roll band inspired by American rhythm and blues. What followed was evolution on a scale music had never seen, from the explosion of Beatlemania in 1964 to groundbreaking albums like Rubber Soul, Revolver, and SGT. Tepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. They transformed recording studios into instruments themselves. They experimented with orchestration, tape loops, Eastern instrumentation, and increasingly introspective songwriting. They matured alongside their audience, moving from love songs to explorations of identity, consciousness, and global awareness. By the time they disbanded in 1970, the Beatles had changed not just rock music, but fashion, film, album art, and youth culture worldwide. They weren't just the biggest band of the 60s, they were the heartbeat of the decade. 5 groups, 5 different sounds, 1 unforgettable era. The 1960s will always be remembered as music's most revolutionary decade. And these bands were its architects. Now the question is, who would you put at #1?